Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the deep spiritual lessons found at the very end of the conquest of Canaan. We so often think of the book of Joshua as just this historical record of epic battles and physical triumphs. But actually, these final chapters reveal something far more profound. They really drive home the point that ultimate victory isn't just about crossing the border into the Promised Land, it's about sustaining that victory through absolute, unwavering fidelity to God's covenant. So, to unpack all of this, we're going to walk chronologically through three incredibly pivotal chapters: Joshua chapter 22, Joshua chapter 23, and Joshua chapter 24. Let's just jump right in. Starting things off with Joshua chapter 22. All right, picture this. The long, honestly grueling conquest of Canaan is finally over. And as the eastern tribes, that's Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, as they return to their inheritance across the Jordan River, they build this massive altar. Well, the rest of Israel immediately assumes this is a rebellious act of blatant idolatry. But instead of just attacking, as recorded in Joshua chapter 22, verses 10 through 14, they actually pause and send Phinehas the priest to investigate before sparking a full-blown civil war. It's a real testament to how godly wisdom and clear communication can step in and prevent a totally devastating conflict among believers. Because when confronted, the eastern tribes are literally horrified by the accusation. As we read further into chapter 22, we find out their intentions were actually a pure, sincere expression of their faith. They knew the Jordan River created this massive physical divide, and they were desperately afraid that future generations would be cut off. So they built this replica altar, not for pagan sacrifice, absolutely not, but as a permanent physical monument to prove that they too were a vital part of God's providence. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates how a genuine commitment to mutual understanding can transform what looks like a crisis of division into this powerful reaffirmation of unity in the Lord. As we read in Joshua chapter 22, verses 26 and 27, they even named this altar Witness. It proved that instead of just jumping to the worst conclusions, seeking the actual truth within the body of believers reveals a deeply shared devotion to God's plan. Moving right along, that brings us to Joshua chapter 23. So with a nation's unity preserved, we now find an aging Joshua delivering this incredibly weighty farewell message to the leaders of Israel. His fighting days are over, right? Referencing Joshua chapter 23, verses 6 through 8, he goes out of his way to emphasize that the land was secured purely by God's power, not by Israel's own military brilliance. And maintaining this incredible blessing requires strict, no-compromise obedience, keeping the law of Moses, refusing to mix with pagan nations, totally shunning false gods, and clinging tightly to the Lord. Joshua basically sums up his entire life experience in this absolutely breathtaking verse, Joshua chapter 23, verse 14. He tells them, "Not one thing has failed of all the good things which the Lord your God spoke concerning you." I mean, wow. This isn't just the statement of some retired military hero reminiscing about old battles. No, this is the ultimate testimony of a man who has witnessed the absolute perfection of God's plan unfold over a lifetime. Every single promise of providence was completely fulfilled. But Joshua follows up this beautiful testimony with a very sobering reality check. In Joshua chapter 23, verses 12 and 13, he strictly warns them that spiritual compromise, things like intermarrying with idolaters and adopting their practices, will absolutely invoke God's righteous anger. Disobedience and turning away from God's commands will lead directly to their removal from the promised land. You see, love and holiness are completely inseparable in the Creator's design. Which brings us to the grand climax in Joshua chapter 24. Joshua summons the entire nation to gather at Shechem. And by the way, that's the very same place Abraham first built an altar when he arrived in Canaan, which is just an awesome detail. According to Joshua chapter 24, verses 2 through 13, Joshua speaks prophetically here, tracing the majestic sweep of providence. From God graciously calling Abraham out of a family of literal idlers, to the miraculous deliverance from bondage in Egypt, all the way to handing them the promised land, he's reminding the people that every single blessing they enjoy stems entirely from God's grace. Having just laid out God's perfect, faithful track record, Joshua essentially forces a definitive choice. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 14, he presents the stark, unavoidable contrast. On one side, you have the false gods their ancestors served beyond the river and in Egypt, and on the other, the Lord God of the covenant who actually stepped in and delivered them. Joshua is drawing a line in the sand here. You simply cannot serve both. And that leads to Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This iconic declaration is such a powerful, uncompromising model of leadership. Joshua makes it crystal clear that true faith, it can't be inherited passively. It requires a deliberate, highly active, and deeply personal choice to submit entirely to God's plan. Now, naturally, in verse 16, the people respond with a lot of emotion, declaring, yes, we too will serve the Lord. But Joshua doesn't just pat them on the back and accept their enthusiastic response at face value. Actually, scratch that, he actively pushes back in verse 19. He challenges them to recognize that serving a holy and jealous God is a deeply solemn commitment, warning them that they simply cannot do it on their own strength. This is a weighty covenant. It demands absolute reverence. When the people insist, though, and firmly confirm their vow, Joshua goes ahead and codifies it. As recorded in Joshua chapter 24, verses 26 and 27, he takes a large stone and sets it up right under an oak tree by the sanctuary of the Lord in Shechem. This stone of witness served as a permanent, physical monument to make absolutely sure that future generations would never, ever forget the sacred vows made before the Lord that day. Following this truly magnificent renewal of faith, Joshua chapter 24, verse 29 records that Joshua passes away at 110 years old. He lived a life entirely, completely poured out for God's purposes. His death closes out a remarkable generation of faith where, as verse 31 notes, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived him. You see, the book of Joshua ends not just with the settling of a physical piece of land, but with the establishment of a profound spiritual legacy. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with Joshua's timeless challenge to ponder deeply for your own spiritual journey. Looking back at the undeniable faithfulness of God's providence in your own life, who will you and your house serve today? Thank you so much for joining me, and may this study truly bless your walk with the Lord.